It's incredibly easy for casting directors to define an actor in a single sentence. That's Judge, that's Billy Rosewood, and that's who he is. And in many ways, that was the reality for Judge Reinhold. He belonged to that distinct group of 1980s actors you could recognize in seconds. The face, the rhythm, the energy. There was something effortless about him. He didn't just deliver comedy, he was the comedy, making audiences laugh without ever looking like he was trying too hard. Throughout the decade, he became a familiar presence in some of the biggest films of the time. He was everywhere, reliable, memorable, and instantly likable. But then, somewhere along the way, he seemed to step back from the spotlight. No big announcement, no dramatic exit, just a quiet absence that left people asking the same question for years. What actually happened to Judge Reinhold? To understand that, you have to go back to the beginning, the name, the early years, and even the nickname that would follow him for life. Born Edward Ernest Reinhold Jr. on May 21, 1957, in Wilmington, Delaware, a city that also happens to be the birthplace of Elizabeth Shue, his roots were grounded in a very different world from Hollywood. His father, Edward Ernest Reinhold Sr., was a Harvard Law School graduate and a respected trial lawyer. During his childhood, the family moved frequently, from Delaware to Fredericksburg, Virginia, where he attended James Monroe High School, and later to Martin County, Florida before his junior year. Those early transitions, constantly adapting to new places and people, quietly shaped the personality behind the actor audiences would one day recognize instantly. The nickname, Judge, wasn't something that came later with fame, it started almost immediately. Within just 2 weeks of his birth, Judge Reinhold was given that name by his father, Edward Reinhold Sr., who noticed the baby's unusually stern, serious expression. To him, the infant looked strikingly similar to a judge he had known during his legal career, and the name simply stuck. Over time, it became so natural that many people who know him today have no idea his real name is Edward at all. After finishing high school, Reinhold chose to pursue acting through formal education, taking his first steps at Mary Washington College and later at Palm Beach State College, then known as Palm Beach Junior College. He didn't stop there. Determined to take the craft seriously, he went on to study at the North Carolina School of the Arts, a highly respected conservatory known for shaping disciplined, professional actors. It wasn't the kind of place you stumbled into. It required auditions, dedication, and a genuine commitment to the art of performance. What stands out even more is how quickly he moved forward. Reinhold began building his screen career before he had even completed his studies, a clear sign of both his ambition and impatience as a young actor. It reflected a certain confidence too, the belief that he was ready, that he could step into the industry and find his place. For someone trained in such a rigorous environment, that early leap wasn't just bold, it was a statement about how seriously he viewed acting, not just as a dream, but as a craft he intended to master. Reinhold arrived with a clear intention, to work, and he left with the skills to actually do it. Judge Reinhold wasted no time stepping into the industry. His very first on-screen appearance came in 1979, when he landed a small role as Jeff Gordon in an episode of the TV series Wonder Woman. It wasn't the kind of role that made headlines, but for a young actor trying to break in, it was everything. The first real step, the first proof that he belonged. From there, the momentum started to build. He moved into a lead role in the 1980 adventure film Running Scared, and soon after, he appeared in the hugely successful 1981 military comedy Stripes, sharing the screen with Bill Murray and Harold Ramis. Stripes became a massive hit, and even in a supporting role, Reinhold found himself part of something bigger, projects that were actively shaping the cultural landscape of the time. Still, none of those early successes fully prepared anyone for the breakthrough that was just around the corner. Then came 1982, and everything changed. Fast Times at Ridgemont High wasn't just another teen comedy, it was a cultural shift. Directed by Amy Heckerling and written by Cameron Crowe, the film captured adolescence with a rare mix of humor and brutal honesty. For many, it became one of those unforgettable viewing experiences, the kind where you always remember when you first saw it. And for Reinhold, it was the role that truly put him on the map, transforming him from a rising actor into a recognizable face almost overnight. Fast Times at Ridgemont High wasn't built around just one breakout star, it was an ensemble filled with unforgettable performances. There was Sean Penn as the iconic Spicoli, alongside a cast that included Phoebe Cates, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Forrest Whitaker, Nicolas Cage, Anthony Edwards, and Eric Stoltz. Right in the middle of that lineup was Judge Reinhold, playing Brad Hamilton, a high school senior juggling a string of fast food jobs while quietly watching his social and romantic life fall apart. Brad wasn't the rebel or the scene stealer. He wasn't the guy with all the answers. He was something far more relatable, an ordinary teenager just trying to keep it together. And that's exactly why Reinhold's performance worked so well. He brought a natural warmth and ease to the role that made Brad instantly likable. The character demanded a balance of physical comedy and real emotional vulnerability, and Reinhold handled both with a subtlety that made the performance feel genuine rather than exaggerated. Later, Reinhold would joke that he expected his own career to explode after the film, only to watch Sean Penn become the one who skyrocketed instead. It was a self-deprecating remark, but it also reflected a deeper reality about Hollywood. In a film driven by such a strong ensemble, multiple careers can be launched at once, but not all of them rise in the same way. Over time, Fast Times at Ridgemont High didn't just remain popular. It grew into something far more significant. In 2000, the American Film Institute ranked it among the 100 greatest American comedies ever made, and by 2005, it was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry at the Library of Congress. For someone who once joked about being overshadowed, Judge Reinhold ultimately found himself permanently tied to one of the most culturally important films of the era. What the film truly did for Reinhold was establish his reputation. He became known as a dependable, naturally gifted comic actor, someone casting directors remembered. And that recognition paid off in a major way by 1984, when a new opportunity arrived that would define the next phase of his career: Beverly Hills Cop. It was a project where chemistry would prove to be everything, helping shape not just a film, but an entire comedic tone for the decade. Interestingly, the story of Beverly Hills Cop didn't begin the way most people expect. The film was originally conceived as a more serious action vehicle for Sylvester Stallone, and Reinhold had already been cast as Detective Billy Rosewood during that earlier version. But when Stallone left the project to pursue Cobra, everything changed. The tone shifted, the script was reworked, and the central character of Axel Foley was reimagined once Eddie Murphy stepped in. That transformation didn't just reshape the film, it set the stage for a completely different kind of success, one that Reinhold would soon be a key part of. What had once been planned as a tough, straightforward action film suddenly transformed into something entirely different. With Eddie Murphy stepping into the lead, Beverly Hills Cop became sharper, faster, and undeniably funnier. And right alongside him, Judge Reinhold turned Detective Billy Rosewood into one of the decade's most memorable supporting characters. The dynamic between the two actors worked instantly. Murphy brought the rapid-fire energy and unpredictable humor, while Reinhold grounded it all with a straight-faced sincerity that made every joke land. Rosewood wasn't written as a punchline. He was something more genuine, an honest, well-meaning cop who actually admired Axel Foley and wanted to do the right thing. That quiet enthusiasm made him likable, even endearing, rather than naive or foolish. When the film was released in December 1984, it didn't just succeed, it dominated, becoming the highest-grossing movie of the year and outperforming major hits like Ghostbusters and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. It quickly became clear that this wasn't just another blockbuster, it was a cultural phenomenon. Over time, both Beverly Hills Cop and Ghostbusters would be selected for preservation in the National Film Registry, recognized for their lasting cultural and historical significance. Reinhold was a key part of that legacy, returning as Billy Rosewood in Beverly Hills Cop 2 in 1987 and again in Beverly Hills Cop 3 in 1994, continuing the role that had firmly cemented his place in 1980s film history. Billy Rosewood was never just a sidekick, and that's largely because of what Judge Reinhold brought to the role. He gave Rosewood a real inner life, a sense of personal values, a quiet moral code, and a loyalty that went beyond rank or procedure. Audiences could feel that authenticity, and it made the character stand out. In many ways, Rosewood became one of those rare supporting roles that people remember just as clearly as the lead. There's also an interesting detail behind the casting of Beverly Hills Cop. Reinhold had already signed on to play Rosewood before Eddie Murphy was ever attached to the project, back when it was still being developed as a more traditional action film with no major star. He committed to a version of the movie that looked very different from what audiences eventually saw. Then Murphy arrived, the tone shifted, and everything around Reinhold changed. That history adds another layer to the film's success, showing how much transformation happened behind the scenes. By the mid-1980s, Reinhold was riding that momentum. Following the success of Beverly Hills Cop, he was given the chance to step into leading roles, appearing in films like Roadhouse 66, Head Office, and Offbeat. While none of these projects became major hits, they reflected something important. The industry saw potential in him and was willing to take a chance, testing whether he could carry a film on his own rather than just support one. In 1986, Judge Reinhold appeared in Ruthless People, a darkly comic crime story directed by the Zucker-Abraham Zucker team. Sharing the screen with Danny DeVito, Bette Midler, and Helen Slater, Reinhold played Ken Kessler, a hapless stereo salesman who gets tangled up in a chaotic kidnapping scheme. The film was both genuinely funny and commercially successful, and it proved that Reinhold could stand his ground in a cast filled with strong, established personalities. During this period, his visibility was at its peak. He was appearing on magazine covers, making rounds on late-night television, and being discussed as one of the true comedic stars of his generation. From the outside, his career seemed to be moving in a steady upward line. Even when certain films didn't fully connect, his name still carried weight. Audiences recognized him, and that recognition translated into real attention. He had reached that rare level where people would show up simply because he was in the film, not just because of the premise. That kind of draw is uncommon in any era. Then came 1988 and Vice Versa, a body swap comedy in which he starred opposite Fred Savage. The idea, a father and son switching bodies, was already familiar by that point, and the film entered a marketplace crowded with similar concepts, making it harder to stand out despite his growing recognition. Vice Versa failed at the box office, and for Judge Reinhold, the fallout was immediate. He has been unusually honest about what followed, describing that moment as the point when his momentum in Hollywood came to a halt, when the phone simply stopped ringing. But what makes his story stand out is that he didn't blame the industry or bad luck. Instead, he openly admitted his own role in the downturn, acknowledging that during that time he had become spoiled, arrogant, and overly demanding, developing a reputation for being difficult to work with, and, as he put it, a reputation that was deserved. He has spoken about it without excuses or softening the truth. Reinhold has said plainly that he had an inflated sense of his own importance and that his behavior on set contributed directly to how he was perceived in the industry. That level of self-awareness is rare. In a business where many people point to external factors when things go wrong, he looked at the same situation and concluded that the problem was himself. In the years that followed, he stepped away and moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, entering what he has described as a deeply personal and often painful period of reflection. It wasn't a quick reset or a superficial comeback story. Instead, he has talked about it as a long process of confronting his past behavior, accepting responsibility, and gradually changing. In interviews, he has framed that time not as a typical Hollywood redemption arc, but as a genuine transformation, one that took years to fully understand and reshape who he was, both professionally and personally. He didn't just step away, he confronted very real consequences. Judge Reinhold has spoken about facing specific reputations, strained relationships, and the impact of his own behavior, working through each of them over time. By the time he emerged from that period, he was noticeably different, quieter, more thoughtful, and, by most accounts, far easier to work with. It was a shift shaped by reflection rather than image. As he once casually admitted about his earliest beginnings, his path into acting itself had been almost accidental, something as simple as following a girl into a high school drama class eventually leading to everything that followed. By the early 1990s, Reinhold had returned to work, though in a very different landscape. He took on a steady stream of roles across smaller films and television projects, including Rosalie Goes Shopping, Daddy's Dyin', Who's Got the Will, and Enid is Sleeping. These weren't the major studio hits that had once defined his career, but they represented something just as important: consistency, persistence, and a growing sense of patience as he rebuilt his place in the industry. Then, in 1994, two notable opportunities brought him back into more familiar territory. He reprised his role as Billy Rosewood in Beverly Hills Cop 3, reuniting with Eddie Murphy for the third installment of the franchise that had helped define his career. That same year, he appeared in The Santa Claus, a Disney holiday comedy starring Tim Allen. In it, Reinhold played Dr. Neil Miller, the well-meaning, slightly awkward, endlessly cheerful stepfather figure whose warmth and comedic presence made him a memorable part of the film's charm. The Santa Claus became a major success and, in many ways, introduced Judge Reinhold to an entirely new generation, audiences who had never seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High or Beverly Hills Cop. His role as Dr. Neil Miller resonated enough that he returned for the Santa Claus 2 in 2002 and the Santa Claus 3, The Escape Clause in 2006, becoming a familiar face in a beloved holiday franchise. Around the same time, television also proved to be a fruitful space for him, offering opportunities that played to his strengths in a different way. In 1994, he made a memorable guest appearance on Seinfeld in the two-part episode, The Raincoats. He played Aaron, a man who becomes oddly attached to Jerry's parents and stands just a little too close in every conversation, earning the nickname the Close Talker. It was a small role on paper, but Reinhold's performance gave it a distinct identity. His portrayal was so committed and obliviously sincere that it stood out immediately, ultimately earning him an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Comedy Series. Despite being little more than a recurring comedic bit, the character became one of the show's most fondly remembered moments. And in hindsight, it marked a shift in Reinhold's career. The leading man ambitions that defined his trajectory in the mid-1980s had evolved into something more adaptable. He had found a new rhythm, one that allowed him to move between film and television, embracing character roles that relied less on status and more on timing, presence, and a willingness to simply be part of the story. There was a clear shift in Judge Reinhold's approach to his career, a willingness to scale things down, to step into smaller roles, and to find humor on someone else's terms. Instead of chasing leading man status, he leaned into the idea that a perfectly executed moment in a great show could have more lasting impact than an entire film built around him. In many ways, that proved true. His close talker character on Seinfeld remains more vividly remembered than many of the movies he headlined in the years following Beverly Hills Cop. That same self-awareness carried even further in his recurring role on Arrested Development. The Fox comedy, which originally ran from 2003 to 2006 before later being revived by Netflix, thrived on absurd, layered humor, and Reinhold fit right into that world. On the show, he played a fictionalized version of himself, leaning into the joke rather than avoiding it. His character even hosted a parody courtroom program titled Mock Trial with J. Reinhold, a playful nod to shows like Judge Judy. The humor leaned heavily on the irony of an actor actually named Judge, playing a character who also functioned as one. It was knowingly ridiculous, and that was exactly the point. Reinhold embraced the absurdity without any trace of vanity, showing a level of self-awareness that perfectly matched the tone of the series, and highlighted just how much his perspective on fame and performance had evolved. His appearance on Arrested Development revealed something deeper about where Judge Reinhold was in his life by the mid-2000s. He was no longer trying to protect a carefully constructed image or limit himself to certain types of roles. Instead, he showed a willingness to lean into the joke, to play a version of himself that was exaggerated, mocked, and openly absurd. And he didn't just accept it, he seemed to genuinely enjoy it. That kind of freedom isn't easy, especially for actors who feel pressure to maintain a certain status or identity. Reinhold made it look natural, almost effortless, which suggests that the personal growth he had gone through in the years before was real and lasting. It reflected a shift not just in his career choices, but in how he saw himself within the industry. Looking back at his personal life, there had been difficult chapters along the way. Reinhold married casting director Carrie Fraser on November 1, 1985, but the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce in 1986. They had no children together. That period coincided with the height of his professional success, but by his own admission, it also aligned with a time when he was struggling personally, representing, in his words, one of the lowest points in terms of who he was becoming. The years following Vice Versa were challenging for Judge Reinhold, both professionally and personally. He stepped away from the center of the industry, moving to Santa Fe, where he spent time reflecting and confronting parts of himself that were not easy to face. It was a period of honesty and discomfort, one that forced real change. Then, in the late 1990s, at a party in Los Angeles, he noticed Amy Miller across the room. Before they could be introduced, she left. But Reinhold didn't let the moment pass. He followed her car, later tracked her down through mutual connections, and eventually arranged to meet her. Their connection moved quickly. Just 6 months later, on January 8, 2000, they were married in Scott, Arkansas. Reinhold has often spoken about her importance in his life, comparing her to the kind of loyal, grounding presence his character Billy Rosewood was to Axel Foley. He has said openly that without her, he doesn't know where he would be, that he might have been completely lost. It's a rare kind of statement, simple but deeply revealing about the role she played in his life. Amy Miller, who grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, is a screenwriter, and the two eventually collaborated creatively as well. Together, they worked on a project titled Be Still, which was later produced as a DVD narrated by Reinhold. They chose to build their life in Little Rock, stepping away from Los Angeles and the pressures of Hollywood. For Reinhold, that decision wasn't an escape, it was intentional. And looking back, it's a choice he has spoken about with clarity and without regret. Los Angeles had given Judge Reinhold so much, and, in many ways, taken a great deal back. In contrast, Arkansas offered something quieter and more grounded, a place where who you were as a person mattered just as much as what you had done professionally. It was there, in February 2013, that he and Amy Miller welcomed their daughter, Haley Rose Reinhold, marking a new and deeply personal chapter in his life. But even later in life, challenges still found their way in. In December 2016, Reinhold was arrested at Dallas Love Field Airport on a misdemeanor disorderly conduct charge at the age of 59. After his bag triggered an alarm at a TSA checkpoint, agents requested a pat-down. He objected, and the situation escalated. Reports stated that he argued with agents, removed his shirt, and used inappropriate language during the confrontation. But that version leaves out too much. It leaves out the Santa Fe years and what they cost him and what they gave him back. It leaves out the marriage, the daughter, the quiet life in Arkansas built entirely on his own terms. It leaves out the Emmy nomination, the Arrested Development self-parody, the Seinfeld close talker that people still quote today. Oh, and it leaves out 41 million Netflix streams in 5 days. 40 years after he first put on Billy Rosewood's badge. And in the summer of 2024, 40 years after the original Beverly Hills Cop broke every box office record in sight, he put on Billy Rosewood's badge one more time, and it felt like coming home. And that is the full story of Judge Reinhold, a man who hit the heights in the 1980s, fell hard, and found his way back not with a grand Hollywood reinvention, but by becoming quietly a better version of himself. If you enjoyed this one, please hit that like button and subscribe. There are a lot more stories like this one coming your way, and you won't want to miss them.